Hello and welcome to Unworthy History. Now here on this channel we're trying to make up for the History Channel's abandoning their mission and not finding any history worthy of showing on their channel. For my episode of Actual History, I'm going to be talking about Theodosia Burr, and more specifically her father as well, who is Aaron Burr. This was Aaron Burr's only child, his daughter Theodosia, who is a prodigy. So this is one book. It was written about 20 or 30 years ago, so it's not an extremely old book by Richard Cote, but it's an excellent biography of Aaron Burr's daughter, who was quite an interesting person. She sort of had Burr's temperament towards intrigue and towards obtaining power at any cost. And so what I'm going to read today is a section from this book that talks about what led up to the duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton in July of 1804 in New Jersey, or actually it was New York. And so I'm going to talk about several of the possible reasons why Burr may have challenged him. So the main thing is that we don't really know exactly what Hamilton said, and so this is going to be some speculation on what unpardonable thing Hamilton said that forced Burr to have to challenge him to a duel. So this is coming up after they're talking about how Burr ran for governor in 1804, and he lost by an 8,000 vote margin to a Federalist candidate, and Hamilton, of course, was in the Federalist Party, and he had a lot to do with Burr's loss. A crisis was quickly at hand, fueled by Hamilton's chronically loose tongue. In the spring of 1804, Judge John Taylor of Albany gathered a group of Federalists for dinner at his home on State Street. They included Hamilton, Judge Kent, and Dr. Charles D. Cooper, a passionate admirer of Hamilton. The discussion soon turned to the upcoming election, whereupon Hamilton let loose with his views. Cooper wrote to Philip Schuyler that General Hamilton and Judge Kent declared in substance that they looked upon Mr. Burr to be a dangerous man, and one who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. Then he went on to say, I could detail you a still more despicable opinion which General Hamilton has expressed of Mr. Burr. The letter was published in the Albany Register on April 24, 1804. The 4 words, still more despicable opinion, published for the world to see, were the straws that broke the camel's back. When he heard of the statements made by Hamilton at the dinner party, Burr insisted on the necessity of a prompt and unqualified acknowledgement or denial of the use of any expressions which could warrant the assertions of Dr. Cooper. But just what was Hamilton's still more despicable opinion? This question, which remains unanswered, has fascinated historians since the day it was uttered. A number of opinions have been voiced. Not surprisingly, given the 2 men involved, they all revolve around politics or women. Burr's perceived threat to the Union as a potential secessionist is cited as one possibility for the still more despicable opinion that Hamilton could have expressed. If this is true, Hamilton would have had to pick Burr out of a long lineup of outspoken secessionists, many of whom were New Englanders of Hamilton's own party. In 1803, Jefferson completed the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States. He quickly filled the new government posts with Republican officials whose influence over the newly enfranchised voters was obvious. New England, the only place where the Federalists held sway, was reduced to a minority section of the country. A collection of anti-Jefferson fanatics, known as the Essex Junto, saw the nation's westward expansion as the death knell for the power of New England. They proposed to carve off the New England states, plus New Jersey and New York, and with Hamilton's leadership, secede from the Union. The secession of the New England states, a new Northern Federal Union, seemed the only way out to some. Hamilton turned them down, so in 1804, New Hampshire Senator William Plumer and 2 other New England proto-secessionists, Timothy Pickering and James Hillhouse, dined with Burr. Plumer recalled Mr. Hillhouse unequivocally declared that it was his opinion that the United States would soon form 2 distinct and separate governments. On this subject, Mr. Burr conversed very freely, and the impression that his observations made on my mind was that he not only thought such an event should take place, but that it was necessary that it should. Hamilton made public Burr's secessionist sentiments in a letter to Robert G. Harper on February 19, 1804. If Burr won, he announced, a dismemberment of the Union is likely to be one of the first fruits of his elevation. If Burr were proposing secession, it would be a direct violation of his oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and therefore a treasonable action. Was holding secessionist tendencies Hamilton's still more despicable opinion of Burr? That is unlikely, for to pillory Burr for secessionist leanings would mean that dozens of other New Englanders, Federalists and Republican alike, would have to be locked into the stocks with him, and to admit that Burr had been conspiring over secession with Federalists would have been just the thing that Jefferson would have jumped on and made public, as he hated both Burr and the Federalists. The first speculation of a feminine impetus for the duel appeared in an 1860 pro-Burr novel by Jeremiah Clemens, entitled The Rivals, a tale of the times of Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. This tale has Burr issuing the challenge because Hamilton had allegedly driven a woman named Adelaide to insanity and death, and had destroyed the reputation of Margaret Moncrief, later Miss Croghan, later divorced, a mistress of Frederick Augustus, the Duke of York, and several other British aristocrats and politicians. She later wrote a book about giving her virgin love to an American colonel on General Putnam's staff, who may or may not have been Burr, whose caddish conduct when she was a teenager nudged her down the slippery slopes which led to an immoral life. Was this example of Burr's alleged profligacy the still more despicable opinion that triggered the duel? Given that both Burr and Hamilton were known womanizers, it hardly seems likely. In a 1902 novel, The Conqueror, Gertrude Atherton suggested that both Hamilton and Burr were lovers of Madame Eliza Bowen Jumel, the rich and notorious widow who in 1833 became Burr's second wife. In the novel, Jumel, in love with Hamilton but angry that he broke off the affair, tells him the night before the duel, "When you die, it will be by the hand of my deputy, Burr. I tell you because I am determined that your last earthly thought shall be of me." However, there is no evidence that Hamilton was ever Jumel's lover, so this theory from fiction must also be discarded. In 1791 and 1792, Hamilton had conducted an adulterous relationship with Mrs. James Reynolds, which he admitted to 3 congressmen. One theory advanced in 1976 by Hamilton biographer Robert Hendrickson was that Hamilton thought the affair was a case of sexual entrapment engineered by Burr, who represented Reynolds in her divorce suit to discredit him. Was this the still more despicable opinion? There is no documentary evidence that Hamilton or his descendants thought so. In his popular 1973 novel, Burr, by Gore Vidal, he introduced the most incendiary possible reason for the duel. In his book, a fictional journalist named Charles Schuler has ingratiated himself with the aged Aaron Burr in order to learn the intimate details of his life and write Burr's biography. When interviewing Burr's close friend, Samuel Swartwout, half drunk and loose-lipped at the time, Schuler asked him, "What was it that General Hamilton said of Colonel Burr that was so despicable? That made him fight the duel." Swartwout said an ugly story, and it was typical of Hamilton to spread it about. He said that Aaron Burr was the lover of his own daughter, Theodosia. Swartwout continued, "Not until I was halfway home did I begin to wonder whether or not what Hamilton had said might after all be true." Swartwout then reflected on what Burr's second wife, Eliza Jumel, had said of Burr and his daughter. He loved no one else. Vidal, whose historical research for his book was prodigious, later admitted that he had made up the entire concept. "The incest motif," he said, "is my invention. I couldn't think of anything else of a despicable nature that would drive Aaron Burr to so drastic an action." Despite being born a novelist and disowned by its own author, the incest motif quickly entered the realm of Burrian folklore. Burr scholars gave it serious consideration for one simple reason: it made sense and had a ring of truth about about it. In 1979, Milton Lomas pointed out that Hamilton might well have believed in the possibility of an incestuous relationship between Burr and his daughter. On June 22, 1792, Hamilton had written a confidential letter to Governor Morris in which he proposed carefully selected Roman code names for the persons to be discussed under the seal of confidentiality. Washington was to be Scaevola, Jefferson Scipio, and Hamilton himself was to be Paulus. For Burr, he chose the code name Savius, after Plautus Savius, who is known to history solely for the fact that he seduced his 9-year-old son and then was ordered by a court to take his own life. In 1998, Arnold A. Rogow addressed the concept and concluded, "It is indeed difficult to imagine any other remark of Hamilton's that could have had a similar result. Nor can anyone be certain that the relationship, whatever its nature between Burr and his daughter, was not believed by Hamilton and others to be incestuous. If that were the case," said Rogow, "Burr could never have let a comment like that go unpunished." Rogow also suggested that Hamilton so loathed Burr and himself that he sacrificed his life in order to destroy Burr's future in politics. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. So again, this is a section from this excellent book, Theodosia. So that is Burr's daughter that was just being discussed there. So it's a really great book that I think was published around 1995. So, you'd always heard about the duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton and this despicable opinion, but there's still an open debate as to exactly what the more despicable opinion was. And probably the most scandalous one that we just heard about there was that Burr possibly had an incestuous relationship with his daughter, although, of course, there's nothing to verify that at all. So anyhow, this is more discussion of actual history that you won't get on the History Channel. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.